Hi, I'm Marlena. I showed up with birthday cake in one hand and found my paralyzed father-in-law alone, chewing a cold slice of pizza, while my husband and his mother laughed from a beach in Hawaii. "Have fun taking care of the cripple," they said. Then Charles stood up from his wheelchair and whispered, "It's showtime." Ever been the one who stayed behind, only to discover you were set up to clean their mess? Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from, and who's the person that never walks away? I pulled up to the Avery house at 4:45, engine ticking as it cooled in the damp October air. The cul-de-sac was so still I could hear the neighbor's wind chime counting the seconds. One hand gripped the grocery store cake on my passenger seat. The other squeezed a card I'd signed 3 different times, unsure how formal to be with a man who used to call me kiddo before life shoved him into a wheelchair. I told myself the whole family was simply late, maybe traffic from Houston. Deep down, I knew better. Lateness wasn't their habit. Avoidance was. I let myself in with the key Avery insisted I keep. The foyer smelled faintly of bleach and lemon candles, the kind Lauren liked to light after scolding me about proper household standards. No birthday banner, no voices, no streamers fluttering from the ceiling the way my mother had always done, even after my dad passed. I set the cake on the hall table, ran fingertips over its plastic lid, and listened. Silence, broken only by the fridge kicking on. A year earlier, almost to the day, I'd watched Charles laugh so hard sweet tea came out his nose. Avery was teasing me about my shifts at the rehab center. Charles had cut him off, said nursing assistants keep the world turning while people like Avery just talk. That was the last full laugh I'd heard before the stroke. Since then, my husband's teasing hadn't softened, only grown snide, and his mother's polite smiles had chilled into thin ice. Charles alone kept asking if I was sleeping, if the night terrors after the miscarriage had eased. He'd fought in Da Nang. Maybe he recognized a different kind of shrapnel. I carried the cake to the kitchen. Halfway there, I stopped short. On the butcher block island sat a single slice of pepperoni pizza, cold grease congealed along the crust, laid on a crumpled paper towel. Beside it, Charles rested in his chair, blanket pooled at his ankles, shoulders sagging. The TV was off, the room dim. No candles, no gift wrap, nothing. His eyes met mine. Apology, shame, a question he was too proud to ask. "Hi, Dad," I whispered, voice echoing in the kitchen tiles. I placed the cake on the counter, found a plate, knife, matches. Busy hands distract racing hearts. Before I could light a candle, the FaceTime tone chirped. Avery's name. I answered. The screen exploded with sunset, fiery reds and golds, and the sound of surf. Avery lounged against a tiki bar, a neon drink sweating in his hand. Lauren leaned into the frame, hibiscus tucked behind one ear. "Oh, good," she sang. "The nurse showed up." Avery smirked. "Hope you're enjoying babysitting the cripple. We figured he wouldn't notice we're gone." Lauren clinked her glass against his. "He won't even know it's his birthday. Just keep him upright, Marlena. Try not to break anything." I steadied the phone on the counter. Charles's jaw quivered. "You left him alone," I said, barely hearing myself. Avery shrugged. "He's got you. Besides, Hawaii was on sale. End of season, you know." Their laughter spilled through the speaker. Something in me cracked. Not loudly, more like fabric tearing under slow force. I pressed end, placed the phone face down. My palms were sweating. I stared at the lonely slice. Grease glistened under the overhead bulb. I thought of the casseroles I'd prepped during Charles's therapy weeks, how Avery joked to coworkers that his wife played pretend chef. I laid a fresh napkin over the slice, smoothing the edges as if tucking in a child who'd never been wanted. A chair squeaked. I turned. Charles's blanket slid to the floor. One foot, then the other, touched tile. Muscles in his calves twitched. He gripped the armrest, eyes locked on mine, pleading for secrecy or daring me to speak, I couldn't tell. Inch by deliberate inch, he levered himself upward. First a crouch, then, against every memory I had of his limp body, he stood. Frail, yes, but not broken. My breath caught like paper in a fan. He wobbled, steadied, drew a breath that filled the room with something electric. For a full second, my lungs forgot how to work. The man the doctors labeled immobile stood there, cheeks flushed, shoulders squared beneath that old marine-issue flannel. I sputtered, You can walk?" He lowered himself back into the chair with deliberate care, as though easing porcelain onto a shelf. "Walk is generous," he muttered, catching his breath. "Shuffle is closer, but it's enough." His gaze slid toward the hallway, making sure no one else materialized. No footsteps, no laughter, just the coffee pot clicking off behind us. I knelt so my eyes were level with his. "How long?" "Since early summer," he said. "Started with 10 seconds at a time when they were out shopping. Added 5 seconds every week." His lips curled, half proud, half ashamed. I kept the tremor on purpose. Makes them underestimate me. My mind sprinted through the last 4 months. Lauren insisting Charles needed stronger sedatives, Avery moving yoga equipment into the guest room, since Dad never uses it. All that pity, all that scorn. They'd milked his condition for sympathy and credit card points. He leaned forward, voice low. If they knew I could stand, they'd ship me to a nursing home before dawn. Easier to control money when the old man's tucked away. Betrayal should have tasted bitter, but mostly I felt clarity, an unexpected, settling focus. "They used us both," I whispered, because it was suddenly obvious. My miscarriage had been followed by Lauren's reassuring pat on the shoulder. Some women just aren't built for motherhood. Avery had booked a golf weekend 2 states over instead of staying for the D&C. Only Charles had texted at 2 a.m., "Proud of you, kiddo." He reached sideways to the bookcase and pressed a concealed latch. A drawer slid out with a soft scrape, revealing a weathered accordion folder, bulging. On top lay a flash drive. "I recorded everything," he said. "Hidden cam in the garage, baby monitor in my room, doctors, lawyers, their phone calls. Even last night, Avery bragging he'd change my IRA beneficiary while sipping Mai Tais." I glanced at the hall again. "Why show me?" "Because you still show up," he said simply. "And because kindness without backbone gets trampled. I've asked too much silence of you already." The folder was heavier than it looked. Bank statements, medical charts marked discontinued meds in red, notarized letters revoking power of attorney from Lauren months ago. "They never noticed," he murmured. "Too busy planning cruises." My pulse thudded. Years of swallowing insults, of telling myself keep the peace, it collapsed in a blink. I pressed a palm over his liver-spotted hand. "Then let's give them a birthday gift they'll never forget." He managed a rusty chuckle. "That's my girl." The grandfather clock chimed 7 from the dining room. I helped him settle, double-checked that the baby monitor light blinked red, still recording, and locked the drawer. On the counter, my phone buzzed. 3 texts from Avery. "Where'd you put Dad's meds? Cake good? Send a pic of the old man for the gram, babe." I powered it off. Outside, dusk had given way to a syrupy darkness. Street lamps flickered on as I eased into my aging Corolla. The passenger seat smelled of frosting and regret. I didn't turn the radio on. I let the engine hum while my thoughts rearranged themselves. No tears tonight, just the slow realization that the version of me who apologized for existing had stayed in that kitchen. Halfway home, a notification flashed on the dash. Voicemail from Avery. Voice tight with suspicion. I ignored it. The subdivision entrance appeared, familiar yet oddly brighter, as if the night approved of my mutiny. At the driveway, I killed the engine, lingering in the hush. House windows glowed warm, but I stayed put, listening to cicadas saw the air, feeling the steering wheel beneath my fingertips. Steady, sure. The woman who had driven away from hospitals alone was still there, but she wasn't alone anymore. I stepped out, gravel crunching under flats, and looked up at the moon. Not just a witness, I told the quiet street. Part of the storm. Morning crept in while the phrase "part of the storm" still echoed like a drumbeat in my chest. I'd slept maybe 2 hours, but adrenaline made coffee unnecessary. By 6, I was on the highway, pink dawn reflecting off the windshield. I didn't text Avery a thing, let him guess why his automatic location pings showed my phone back at his father's place. Steering onto the familiar driveway, I felt the first spark of ownership, as if the cracked concrete already knew it would soon answer to someone else. Charles waited in the doorway, robe belted, posture straighter than any physical therapist would believe. He tipped his chin toward the garage. "We'll need a step stool." That was all. No good morning, no small talk, just mission tempo, the kind of clipped efficiency he probably used in the jungle half a century ago. Cobwebs hung from the rafters when I clicked on the fluorescent strips. The smell, old paint, two-cycle fuel, forgotten Christmas wreaths, wrapped around us. Avery never let me linger here, said this was guy space. Funny how masculinity required a padlock. Charles guided me to the far wall, tapped a drywall seam I'd never noticed. "False ceiling panel," he whispered. "Push up and slide." Balanced on the stool, I shoved. Flecks of plaster rained down and a metal lockbox thunked onto my hands. Inside, 3 palm-sized cameras and a battered external hard drive jostled against each other. "They forgot one thing," Charles murmured. "I was trained to document enemy movement." We carried the loot to the basement office, an unfinished room Lauren called the dungeon. Dust coated every surface because no one bothered to clean a space only Charles used. I set the drive on the desk, booted the dusty tower PC. The monitor blinked alive, revealing a dated operating system but enough to load the files. Footage filled the screen, time-stamped clips, each labeled by hand. Charles tapped, "June 12th, kitchen." Lauren's voice crackled through tiny speakers. "If he drops dead before July, I swear I'll take a cruise in his honor." My stomach flipped, yet I clicked the next file anyway. Avery leaned over the wheelchair, whispering so sweetly the microphone barely caught it. "Stay alive till the refinance clears, old man. After that, no promises." Clip after clip rolled. Talk of selling heirloom rifles, draining retirement funds, forging signatures. Then one from just 2 nights earlier in the garage. Avery, tipping back beer, bragged to Lauren about erasing me from Dad's debit card. "She's useful, picks up prescriptions, keeps the lights on, but once we move him to Meadowbrook, we ghost her. Simple." He toasted to the plan. She clinked. I froze, hands fisted so hard my nails dug crescents into my palms. Cost sharing, groceries, Avery's so-called business conferences. I'd paid for half of it on the same card he just canceled. Charles's jaw tightened. "They strip us piece by piece," he said, voice low. "First dignity, then money, finally memory." I inhaled, steadying myself. "We have proof. But will it matter without the rest?" He reached for the desk drawer, produced a ring of tarnished keys. "There's more buried upstairs, files I hid when my handwriting still looked steady. Beneficiaries, asset transfers, passwords." His eyes pinned me. "What's up there might change everything." "Then let it." I pocketed the keys and headed for the attic stairs. Hardwood creaked under each step. Insulation dust floated like snow in the narrow beam of my flashlight. At the back, a dented filing cabinet crouched behind suitcases. The middle drawer resisted, metal groaning, but finally slid open. Inside lay folders the color of cigarette smoke. The first tab read, "Amendment, beneficiary change." I checked my phone. 2 days until their return flight. Plenty of time if I worked faster than panic. Knees trembling, I flipped the folder open. Charles's signature beside a witness seal dated last March. The new beneficiary line glowed in faded ink. Marlena E. Avery. A shiver, part vindication, part grief, ran the length of my spine. Not once had Avery mentioned this change. Of course not. He probably planned to shred it once Charles accidentally misplaced the document. A floorboard creaked downstairs. Charles called up, "You all right?" "Better than all right," I answered, hugging the folder to my chest. "I think we just found the backbone of our case." Yet something in me knew this was merely the first layer. Cabinets rarely guard only one secret. Clock on the wall read 11. Sunlight filtered through attic vents, dust motes swirling like unsettled ghosts. 2 days. I slid deeper into the cabinet, searching for anything that could dismantle their story once and for all. I thought I was helping him dig up the past, but what we uncovered, it was far from over. The attic smelled like cardboard and cedar dust. I sat cross-legged on the creaky floorboards, the light from a narrow skylight slanting across the folder I'd just pulled out. Its edges were frayed, but the label was clear. Amendment. Beneficiary change. My hands weren't shaking, but something in me was. Like a calm before the kind of storm that doesn't come with thunder, just truth. I unfastened the rusted clasp, expecting, I don't know, a draft, a note of intention, but this was a fully executed document, signed, notarized, stamped, and then my breath caught, my name. Marlena Avery, sole caretaker and executor of the estate. Not Darley, not even Avery, me. There was no way this was a mistake. It had Charles's full legal name, his signature, and a date from just over 6 months ago. I looked over the notary seal. It was real. I'd done enough mortgage paperwork to recognize a valid signature. No trickery here. Not as I lifted the last page, a single sheet of lined paper fell into my lap. It was yellowed and folded into fourths, ink slightly smudged. If you're reading this, it means I still trust you, not because you're perfect, but because you never treated me like I was less than human. If anything happens to me, if I disappear, if I fall silent, this document is your light. Show it to them. Let them choke on the truth. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. I pressed the note to my chest for a moment, then slipped both the legal pages and the handwritten one back into the folder. The house creaked below, maybe just settling. Maybe not. Either way, I moved carefully down the attic ladder, stepping softly on each rung, folder in hand like it held the weight of justice. Charles was in the kitchen, his chair positioned by the open window, the breeze ruffling the edge of the newspaper on his lap. His eyes flicked to me, then the folder. I didn't say a word. I just handed it to him. He opened it, scanned the front page, and closed his eyes. I thought they might have burned it, he said quietly, almost to himself. They found the copy I kept in the bedroom safe, but not this one. I crouched beside him. They tried to make you change it? His laugh had no humor. They threatened to let me rot, said they'd take away the nurse, stop bringing food. Avery yelled that I was playing dictator. Darley called me a burden, but I was still in my right mind. I knew what I was doing, and I knew who'd show up, even when they didn't. He turned to me, eyes sharp again, steel underneath the fatigue. That's why you're on that paper. I didn't know what to say. I thought of all the weekends Avery needed time to decompress while I cleaned his father's sheets, of Darley's casual cruelty, brushing crumbs off her dress while calling Charles a relic with good insurance. And now, this. I stood and reached for a glass of water. The kitchen clock said 2:17 p.m. I'd barely noticed time passing. The world had narrowed to paper and memory came fast now. 2 years ago, at one of Darley's wine nights, I'd passed through the hallway as she was laughing to someone on speakerphone. "He's not dead yet?" she snorted. "Must have done a deal with the devil." Back then, I thought it was tasteless sarcasm, her brand. But now I saw it clearer. That wasn't a joke. It was disappointment. She'd been waiting on an inheritance that refused to arrive. Behind me, Charles wheeled over to the wall cabinet. He pressed the edge of a panel and it clicked open. Another folder slid out, thinner this time. Inside was a single page. "If I die," he said softly, "you have first right to buy this house. $1. It's already notarized. They don't know this exists." I blinked. "Why me?" His answer was quiet. "Because you made this house feel alive again, and they've mocked you for too long." I stared at the deed, the clause, the clean typewritten lines that spelled out a decision made in secret. "I never wanted any of this," I said aloud, though I wasn't sure who I was saying it to. "Wanting it isn't the point," Charles replied. "Understanding why they hate you is." I looked up slowly, the folder clutched in my hands, his words sinking deep like a slow, steady weight. "Now you understand why they hate you," he'd whispered. and the words kept pulsing in my ears long after we left the attic. I sat at the kitchen table, late afternoon sun drifting across the laminate like a slow tide. The amended will and the $1 house agreement lay in front of me, edges weighted by a chipped mug. My fingertips still tingled, but the tremor wasn't fear anymore. It was purpose. "I won't let them maneuver you again," I said, steadying my voice. "We do this by the book. No shortcuts they can twist." Charles nodded as if he'd already run that calculus. "Then fetch the brown notebook in my office. Bottom drawer, left-hand side." The office smelled of typewriter oil and old victories. Under a stack of dog-eared manuals sat a leather journal embossed with faded initials. Inside the front cover, one number was written twice, once in ink, once in pencil, as if to remind whoever held it that the digits mattered more than the paper. Back in the kitchen, I dialed. A firm baritone answered on the first ring. "Halpern. This is Marlena Avery. Charles said you might be expecting my call." A brief pause, then warmth. "Ah, the daughter-in-law who still shows up. Put my old friend on, would you?" Charles took the receiver, exchanged pleasantries in a code of shared battles I couldn't fully translate, references to VA hearings, a fishing trip that doubled as reconnaissance. Then he handed the phone back. "Marlena," Halpern said, "I filed that will the week Charles signed it. County records are immutable. They can howl, but they can't erase ink that's already dry. More important, I hold the original trust from '09. If a physician clears Charles to manage his affairs again, full authority reverts to him, and by extension to you as his designated agent. I'll drive up tomorrow with certified copies." Relief flooded me, hot and unexpected. "Thank you, sir." "I'm just the mechanic," he replied. "You and Charles are the engine." The line clicked off. Charles rolled to the pantry cabinet, reached behind canned peaches, and produced a miniature safe. The key he'd pressed into my palm earlier fit perfectly. Inside, neatly bound packets, life insurance payouts, brokerage statements, a revoked power of attorney signed 3 months after his so-called stroke. Nestled between ledgers sat a photograph. Our wedding day. Charles in his dress blues, Avery stiff beside him. Lauren turned 3/4 from the camera so her forced smile wouldn't crack. Charles tapped the image. They framed a copy for themselves. Cropped me out. I kept the real one. Something inside me, the last filament of blind loyalty, finally snapped. "They've been rewriting the story for years," I said. "Time we hand the audience the director's cut." Dusk settled across the house, drawing long shadows over paperwork that now felt less like evidence and more like ammunition. I brewed coffee, though neither of us needed caffeine. We spent an hour sorting documents into piles, assets, medical records, forged requests. Charles's precise military penmanship labeled each folder. 8:30 rolled in on the grandfather clock's measured chime. I was sliding the final stack into a banker's box when the landline rang, an antique rotary that seldom buzzed unless telemarketers found it. Charles glanced at the caller ID, jaw tightening. "Avery," he murmured. "Answer on speaker." I hesitated only a heartbeat before pressing the button. The line opened with wind noise and what sounded like bar music. Avery's voice came through, too loud, maybe too many cocktails. "Dad? Marlena? You two having a cozy little evening?" A brittle laugh. "Listen, I checked the account this afternoon. My debit card isn't working. Care to explain?" Charles's gaze drilled into me. This was it. The confrontation neither of us could postpone. "Avery's on the line," Charles said again, calm as a judge. "Put it on speaker." I reached for the speaker button without flinching. Charles didn't move either. His eyes locked on the phone like it might combust. "Hey there, birthday boy." Avery's voice slid through the line, syrupy and smug. "How's the party? You and the maid cut the cake yet?" In the background, Lauren cackled like it was the best punchline she'd heard all week. "Maybe she lit a candle on a pizza slice," she added, barely able to breathe from laughing. I didn't say a word. I wanted them to keep going. I wanted them to feel safe, stupid and smug, just long enough to hang themselves with their own words. Then Charles leaned forward in his chair and spoke. steady, sharp, and far too lucid for their comfort. "Hello, son." The line went quiet. "Dad?" Avery's voice dropped half an octave. "You're, standing?" Charles's tone didn't shift an inch. "That's not your concern, but your inheritance? That might be." There was a rustling on the other end, as if someone had bumped the phone or dropped something. Lauren jumped in, voice shrill. "This is manipulation! Marlena's manipulating you! She's brainwashing you, Charles!" I stepped in smoothly, opening the folder that had been sitting on the table beside me. "Actually," I said, "I'm executing the responsibilities given to me under a legally binding durable power of attorney, signed by Charles Bundy and notarized 6 months ago. The attorney of record is Mr. Jacob Halpern." Silence again. Then Avery. "What are you talking about? You're not even family." I cut him off flatly. "According to Charles's will, which your mother conveniently never told you about, I am. In fact, I'm the only one listed as successor trustee." Charles nodded toward me like a silent endorsement. His eyes were calm, but cold, the kind of cold you only earn after a lifetime of betrayal. Lauren huffed, audibly frustrated. "This is absurd. We already changed the locks on the vacation house in Big Bear. We've been cleaning out all that antique junk, making space, you know. That place needed an upgrade anyway." I felt my hands tighten on the arms of my chair. That house was in the irrevocable trust. Their arrogance had just confessed to theft, on a recorded line. "You sold items from a property held in trust?" I said, voice still level, but now with a heat beneath it. "Lauren, I hope you realize that's not just rude, it's criminal." "You can't prove anything," she spat. Charles didn't blink. "Everything you've touched can be traced. Every item, every deposit. You think you're untouchable because you laughed while I was in a wheelchair? Because you threw a party in Hawaii on my birthday?" Avery growled. "This is insane. You can't come after us with, what? Some lawyer's letter?" "You'll find out tomorrow morning," I said, "when the cease and desist is served to both of you. Halpern's already drafting it tonight." "You're bluffing," Lauren barked. "No," I replied, my voice steady like a glass pane that was about to crack. "You just got too comfortable stealing from someone you thought was weak." Avery's voice dropped again, this time shaky. "What do you want?" Charles leaned back in his chair. "To see what happens when the forgotten become the powerful." Lauren was losing it now. "You're a selfish, bitter old man who's letting some gold digger poison you." I raised an eyebrow, ignoring the insult. "Your problem," I said calmly, "is that you assumed kindness was weakness, but some of us know how to fight quietly and win." "You're not getting away with this," Avery shouted. "We'll get our own lawyer." Charles chuckled, low and dry. "Good. Let them read the trust, then let them explain to you how badly you've messed up." The line started to distort from raised voices. I could hear Lauren yelling something about calling their cousin in real estate law, as if that could undo everything they'd already admitted. I reached forward and calmly ended the call. The silence that followed rang louder than any shouting. I looked down at the phone, fingers still resting on the buttons, heart pounding but face cool. Then I turned to Charles. "You've made a very big mistake," I said quietly into the room. "See you in court." The phone call ended with a hollow click, but the words still hung in the air, sharp and echoing. I didn't need to look at Charles to feel his resolve. He didn't speak. He simply rose, slower this time, with more weight on his cane, and motioned for me to follow. No words, just that look again. Determined, focused. We moved through the silent house, past the family portrait still hanging crooked on the hallway wall. Dust had begun to claim the corners, like even the house had started grieving. Charles stopped at the foot of a narrow staircase tucked behind the pantry. He glanced at me. "They never came up here," he said. "Too busy making plans to bury me." The attic groaned as we stepped in. The smell was old wood and thyme. Charles reached for the light chain, and the bulb flickered on, casting long shadows over forgotten boxes and canvas-covered furniture. The floor creaked with every step, and something about that sound made my pulse quicken. "They thought the dust would keep their secrets safe," Charles muttered. "But I always knew the truth prefers silence." We moved box by box. Old tax records, holiday cards, a box labeled Avery's College that was surprisingly light. But then, tucked beneath a stack of old photo albums, was a cracked leather binder. It looked unremarkable until I opened it. Inside were documents so brittle they seemed to whisper as I turned the pages. But what they revealed shouted. The original trust, irrevocable and untouched. Charles's signature, notarized years ago. Handwritten notes detailing each account moved, each deed reassigned. And then, stapled in the back, pages of forged signatures. Lauren's handwriting, unmistakably clumsy, where it tried to imitate her husband's hand. I looked up. Charles's mouth tightened, but he didn't seem surprised. "They thought I was losing it," he said, his voice flat. "So I let them think that. The more I forgot, the more careless they got." He knelt beside a different box and pulled out a faded composition notebook. Pages and pages of what looked like journal entries, but really it was a ledger. Every sale, every withdrawal, every time Lauren or Avery dipped their hands into his life like it was theirs to take. They laughed when I started putting notes on sticky pads, said I was going senile, Charles added. But every note I left out was a decoy. The real records lived up here, with the mold and the mice. We spent the next hour cataloging what we found, photographing everything with my phone. I emailed backup copies to myself, to Charles's cloud folder, and to Mr. Redmond, the family lawyer. Charles nodded in approval as I hit send. By late afternoon, we were sitting across from Mr. Redmond in his small office just outside town. The man had been in the family's legal circle for decades, but as he flipped through the binder, his expression shifted from skepticism to cold rage. "This wasn't just mishandling," he said, tapping the forged pages. "This is felony fraud. And combined with what Charles has written here, elder abuse, financial coercion, maybe even conspiracy to defraud the trust." He glanced at me, then at Charles. "And the power of attorney you reactivated last spring? That means, Marlena, you have full legal authority to act on his behalf." I didn't say anything, just nodded. But something inside me settled. This wasn't just a fight anymore, it was justice. We began drafting the legal orders. Redmond dictated while I typed, freezing any asset transfer requests, halting sales, putting liens on accounts. Charles reviewed each document like he was reviewing battle maps. And when we got to the list of antiques sold from the vacation property, I added a formal reversal notice to each. Those items were never theirs to sell. And now, legally, that was clear. It was dark when we got back to the house. Charles moved slower now, the day having taken its toll, but his grip on his cane was firm. He led me into his study, opened a drawer that stuck halfway, then reached behind it. Something clicked. Out came a manila folder, different from the rest, cleaner, newer. He held it out to me, but didn't open it. "This," he said softly, "is what they'll never expect." I stared at him. "What is it?" He just smiled, tired but triumphant. "And you're the one who'll deliver it." I walked into the courtroom with Charles's folder pressed tightly to my chest, the seal still unbroken. My heels echoed louder than I expected against the marble floor. Avery and Lauren were already seated at the long table up front, smirking like they were watching a second-rate sitcom. Lauren tossed her hair and muttered something to their lawyer, who gave me a dismissive glance. But then his eyes caught the folder. His whole body stiffened, the smirk melted, and suddenly, it was quiet. I handed the folder directly to the judge's clerk, who received it with a nod and immediately brought it to the bench. The judge, a woman with eyes sharp enough to peel wallpaper, leaned forward as the seal cracked. A low hush swept the gallery. "Proceeding to supplemental document review," she said, her voice clipped. "Introduced by party Marlena Calhoun under advisement of the estate's primary testator, Mr. Charles L. Calhoun." I took my seat. Avery shot me a glare. Inside the envelope, page after page bore Charles's unmistakable scrawl, But the document that broke the room's breath came 2 pages in, an amended clause from 6 years ago, notarized, time-stamped, and legally airtight. The judge read aloud, "All named heirs shall forfeit their claim to any estate distributions, financial or material, if they fail to demonstrate continued moral fitness, presence at familial milestones including but not limited to medical emergencies, birthdays, and end-of-life decisions. Malicious neglect and absence constitute grounds for permanent disinheritance." The silence snapped. Gasps. A woman in the second row slapped a hand over her mouth. A court reporter let out a whispered, "Oh, wow." Even a cameraman from the local news station straightened in his seat like he'd just realized this wasn't some probate routine, it was history. Lauren's voice sliced through the moment. "This is ridiculous. That's coercion. He was old. He didn't know what he was doing." The judge barely blinked. "The document predates your argument, and I have here a video deposition from 3 days ago, submitted directly from the care facility." The screen lit up at the front of the courtroom. There was Charles, upright, eyes clear. "I know exactly what I'm doing," he said in the video. "They left me alone, on my birthday, called me names, laughed while I sat with a slice of pizza, and no one to blow out candles. That isn't love. That's cruelty hiding behind the mask of family." The clip ended. The courtroom stayed silent. My eyes drifted to Charles in the gallery. His hand rested firmly on the arm of his wheelchair. He met my gaze and gave me the smallest nod. We weren't just making a point, we were setting a boundary that should have been drawn long ago. The judge looked down at Lauren. "Do you have anything further to add before I proceed?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. I knew why. Because next came the time-stamped photos. I reached into my file and passed them up. There they were. Avery and Lauren on a beach chair in Maui, holding up mimosas on the exact date and time Charles had been sitting alone, forgotten, waiting for someone, anyone, to say happy birthday. The judge reviewed them without a word. Then she turned her attention to the flash drive included in the envelope. "Additional supporting video? From the defendant?" The video played. Charles, years younger, seated beside his longtime caregiver who would later resign under Lauren's pressure. "This clause," he said, gesturing to the paper, "protects the legacy, not for money, but for love. I can't let them wear the Calhoun name like a coat they only pull out for holidays." The court clerk stopped the video on the frame where Charles stared directly into the camera. My throat tightened. That was the moment I remembered why I'd stayed, why I'd helped him. He knew, long before I did. Avery couldn't hold it in anymore. He bolted upright and pointed across the room. "You did this!" he roared at me. "You manipulated him. You wormed your way in like some gold-digging nurse." "Avery!" the judge warned. But he was past the point of no return. "You planned this whole thing. You made him sign it. You're not family." I didn't move. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I held up one more piece of evidence, a printed screenshot of Avery's flight itinerary and a social post, him and Lauren tagging a resort with "no cripples allowed." A murmur of disgust rippled through the courtroom. The judge glanced back down at the documents and then looked straight at me. "Under the conditions of this amended clause," she said, her voice steady but firm, "all inheritance rights are hereby voided for Ms. Lauren Calhoun and Mr. Avery Calhoun, effective immediately." Lauren let out a shocked sob. Avery just stood there, pale as stone. The judge continued, "The entirety of the Calhoun estate, liquid, fixed, and intellectual, shall be transferred to the sole designated trustee outlined in the clause, in accordance with Mr. Calhoun's intent." A pause. She turned toward me. "And do you accept what's been entrusted to you?" I looked at Charles. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. My voice found its way out, stronger than I remembered it. "Yes," I said. "I do." "Yes," I said, my voice clear in the tall room. "I accept, because this isn't about wealth, it's about restoring what should never have been taken." The judge's gavel came down, crisp and definitive. Control of every account, property, and share slid from Avery and Lauren's fingers into mine. Their attorney packed papers with shaking hands. Lauren's mascara streaked while she sobbed into a silk scarf. Avery stormed out first, shoulders rigid, muttering about appeals, but the echo of the ruling followed him like a drumbeat he couldn't outrun. Court officers ushered reporters aside so Charles could exit. He refused the wheelchair. Instead, he gripped his cane, nodded politely to every stunned onlooker, and walked the length of the corridor under his own power. When we reached the sunlight outside, he exhaled, as though the last 3 years finally lifted from his chest. Back in Pasadena, late afternoon light poured through freshly washed windows. The cold pizza pan was gone, replaced by the smell of bubbling lasagna. I set 2 plates on the table, real china, not paper this time, and poured sweet tea into heavy glasses Charles kept from his Navy days. He settled into the dining chair at the head of the table. "First hot meal I've had in my own house in months," he said, eyes glinting. "And no one calling it a waste of calories." We ate in unhurried silence, letting the ordinary act of dinner feel revolutionary. When the dishes were rinsed, Charles wheeled a small cedar chest from the hall. Inside lay the photo album Lauren once tried to trash, now dusted and whole. He opened to a page of Polaroids, him and my late husband, smiling beside a battered fishing boat, me holding up a tiny base like it was gold. "I kept this one," he said, tracing the faded edge, "because I looked genuinely happy, and so did you." I ran a thumb over the picture. That trip had taken place 2 summers before the stroke, before grief made Avery's humor mean and Lauren's ambitions ruthless. I realized how long it had been since I'd seen that version of myself, laughing without a clock ticking over my head. Charles closed the album, slid it toward me. "This legacy isn't cash, Marlena. It's choosing who gets a seat at the table. Money just pays for the chairs." We moved to the study where new documents awaited signatures. Paperwork launching the Calhoun Foundation for Abandoned Caregivers. Halpern had drafted bylaws. I added a mission statement in plain language, grants for respite care, legal aid, and training. Charles initialed every page with hands that barely shook. Night settled outside. Porch lights clicked on up and down the street, families finishing dinner. I stood by the window, watching shadows stretch across the lawn Avery once promised to sod, but never did. Maybe I'd plant lavender next spring. Charles spoke behind me. "Blood doesn't prove love. Presence does." I nodded. "Sometimes the family that matters is the one that stays when things go quiet." We recorded a short video for the Foundation's site, Charles explaining the clause, me inviting viewers to share their own stories. As I pressed stop, he asked, "You ready for people to know everything?" "Truth is lighter than lies," I answered, surprised by my own steadiness. Before bed, I set one last place at the dining table, an empty chair across from mine, a reminder that someone, somewhere, is always arriving late to understanding. And that seat will stay open in case they decide to change. Have you ever watched someone be forgotten until they proved they were the most unforgettable one in the room? Have you ever been the only one who stayed while everyone else walked away? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one.